Welcome to Coffee Con Talks fifth episode, and today we have the pleasure of welcoming Murli Neelakantam, who is the principal lawyer of Amicus, and we have the pleasure of welcoming back Ashish Sir, who is a professor at GIP. So let's get started.
Let's
So
just
I
start
think
with the let's get started with the interview, Ashish.
Sure.
Ashish, mental health and well-being are getting increasingly important nowadays. How will this affect health economics and health law, especially in terms of medical malpractices and negligence in mental health?
Like Murli said in his email, and unfortunately, I fall in the same boat. I'm nowhere close to being a mental health professional. I don't know enough about the area to comment with any level of expertise. But I feel reasonably safe in saying that mental health is an area that is, I don't think underrated is the right word to use, but it's not given as much importance as it should. And this is true both from the point of view of data collection, whatever little work I've done in terms of trying to figure out the incidence of mental health problems in this country, data is really difficult to come by. First problem. Second, from a sociological or a cultural perspective, I think there is a stigma associated with even acknowledging the fact that mental health as a problem can exist in our families. And it's not just any one particular group or any one particular part of the country. This unfortunately seems to be a stigma that's present across the length and breadth of this country. So, to the extent that whatever it is that we are proposing in our model will help deliver better quality of healthcare services, one can hope that at least the first part of this problem will be cured. The second, I don't think is a function of what a government or a policymaker can do. It depends upon how open we are about acknowledging that mental health is a problem that needs to be A, acknowledged and B, cured. That we can't cover for. Would be my way of answering it. But once again, I'll say it's not an area of expertise where I'm concerned at all.
thank you, sir. Uh, so this question is for Morley, sir. Can the awareness among people regarding health laws, regarding medical malpractices, and so on, can be improved? Also, given how people who gained information on immunity boosting supplements and so on chose to over medicate themselves with them. So, how does one strike a balance in the population between medical awareness, like knowing about drugs, their generic versions, and the frugality and discussion when it comes to using them or handling health issues in general?
I think there's a general lack of understanding of law. And if you look at even your own personal laws, how many of you know marriage law, succession law, family law, things that actually affect your lives every day? Very few people do. Most adults don't. Even educated adults don't know enough about even the basics of law. So we have that struggle there. The issue with what you have raised and the lack of awareness is to do with what is carried in the news. This is not a newsworthy issue, unfortunately. Let me give you an example. Thanks to all the protests, people started reading the preamble. It was not taught in civics class with any real sense of pride, and people didn't actually read it. We started reading the preamble because you had the protests. Similarly, if we had more awareness about these issues, the fact that there is nothing called an immunity boosting shirt or immunity boosting glass or mug or flask, and we just get rid of all of that stuff in the press, then people will be aware of it. If you can look at it and laugh at it and make people look like idiots, then that will all disappear. So it's the same with generic drugs. If only people started talking about it a little more, awareness was spread by the press, by people who knew, there were enough campaigns around it. Thankfully, we're beginning to see it with online pharmacies. We hadn't seen those earlier. Now you're seeing those ads. I see them at the back of buses as well, all over the place, generic only pharmacies. When you now try to buy online, it gives you alternatives at all of these websites that you want to buy. So I think now there is starting to be a little bit of awareness on it. Earlier, it was government putting out press releases and publicity about these things. That's no longer really the way to do it. With technology, with young people, I think what we need is for all of you to raise awareness on these things. Just like we've had on Me Too, we had awareness, right? Nobody knew about it. Marital rape, we've had. 377, we've had. Preamble, we've had. So on many of these issues, it's topical. It takes few people to start it. And I hope, with COVID, there would have been a chance to do it. I don't see it, but I'm hoping, but that's the only way you can raise awareness about some of these issues. When we've raised issues on quality of drugs, I mean, Amit Verma has done a podcast with Dinesh Thakur. The book is out, Bottle of Lies. People need to read it. I mean, I don't know how else to get it out to people. We can write, we can talk, but if you don't consume it, there's nothing we can do about it. So there is a move. The pandemic is a great time to do it. There are materials available. How do we propagate it? I don't know. I'm not on WhatsApp. You guys tell me.
Can I give a answer that is only half a joke, but the other half is dead serious? To the second question, write more papers with Murli, and I mean that quite seriously. So I myself learned, I can't tell you how much more. It's not as if I'm an expert, but I certainly know more now than I did even a year ago when it comes to India's healthcare sector. That part is a joke. Murli is not going to write paper with 1.4 billion Indians. But the part that is not a joke is one great way to gain expertise is to quite literally write or speak or create any stuff for other people to consume. The pressure of being right when you educate somebody else will teach you more than anything else ever will.
Now, I think it's a great one, Ashish. Even if you do small little, slides or videos or audios or podcasts, 3 slides, 4 slides on specific things, it's a great experience. And when Ashish says, it's great to work together and write, it doesn't have to be 30,000 words. Do 300-word pieces, 800-word pieces, and put them out there. Thankfully, today you can propagate much more quickly. I mean, the book that we write will probably be read by a few thousand people. But if you can do something in bite-sized chunks that you can propagate, then there's enough channels out there. And your networks are fantastic. I think you underestimate the reach that you have in your networks. 100 people, they know 100 people. It's exponential in that sense at a level that you really can't imagine. I don't think you've realized. And that's how, all the mamus put forward their WhatsApps, right? That's how it goes viral. So if middle-aged men who are completely wrong can get so much out, surely you guys can do better.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed.
The third question is for Ashish sir.
Mm-hmm.
How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the way we study health economics?
I don't think it's affected it enough in the sense that all of us have learned where to go to access data about how the spread of COVID is happening and how many cases are rising. And everybody, unfortunately or fortunately, is familiar with what R0 is and so on and so forth. But I don't think we as citizenry are asking enough questions about how exactly we are upping our infrastructure game pertaining to healthcare, number one. And number two, I don't think we as citizenry are raising enough of a concern with our governments, even local governments, in terms of we demand this and we have the right to this as well, citizens of this country. So information about COVID has gone up. Information about the quality and the extent, the reach of health infrastructure has not gone up. And I think we need to do a better job.
I think also with the way we're seeking information, anything you ask is anti-national. It seems like criticism. So when we ask the question on, you're claiming you'll vaccinate everyone by the year end, we know it's impossible. Tell us how. It was seen as criticism of government and criticism of the vaccine, and therefore criticism of the prime minister. That's how it got stretched. Until we accept that it's an important question and we need to get answers, hold government accountable. And a lot of people talk about it and say, it's a reasonable question to ask. Show us how you will do it. That's where it all starts. So there is no point having a law that says you're entitled to free health. Your universal health care is a fundamental right. Everybody knows all that. How are you going to do it? So again, it has to be the young people who stand up and say, I'm going to fight for vaccines for everyone. I'm going to fight for how it is that you're going to provide basic health care. And COVID showed you that we are lacking in basic infrastructure for healthcare. So what are you going to do about it? Again, the information that Ashish and I and some of the others found, like dated 2016, 17 estimates. So nobody's asking the questions. I mean, get your politicians to ask questions. Parliament is in session. Write to them and say, where is the plan? Force government to answer these questions. Send a written question. Keep on sending questions to Parliament. There's so much you can do, and it's not difficult. It's not a change.org petition. But if you do end up with, a reasonable paper. Again, when I mean paper, it doesn't have to be more than 2,000 words, and send it to your MPs, send it to people in parliament. They'll be happy to actually go and ask these questions for you. Then it will get the publicity. Somebody will write about it. You'll watch it, even if it's on Rajya Sabha TV. Somebody will make a clip, send it on YouTube. You have a chance. Somebody has to make the effort. I think that's how it can change. It hasn't, but it can change.
Indeed, couldn't agree.
And the next question is for Ashish sir. So India's young and employable population should be kept in a good health. It must be kept in a good health. So what should our healthcare system look like for this scenario? And how can India bring forth more preventive care facilities like sanitation, cleanliness, immunization in order to reduce the amount of curative care required? And keeping this in mind, how do we also improve the curative care facilities that we have in the country?
Wow. I honestly don't know where to start in terms of answering this question. But hey, I taught you guys principles of economics. So first, I would argue it's about getting our incentives right. And unfortunately, right now, our incentives are in terms of revenue maximization for providing healthcare rather than minimizing, or as you speak about it, preventive healthcare. And there are certain things that one can do. For example, all of us are familiar with the example of Chinese rural medicine, where the doctor is paid money so long as you're healthy and is not paid for having to treat you. And now the onus of the incentive is on the doctor to be able to prevent diseases from occurring. That's a simple first pass answer, but obviously when it meets reality, and reality is complex as that of India, I don't think it's an answer that can be implemented just overnight. But first and foremost, get the incentives right. Number one. Second, this actually ties back to the earlier question that you asked. It depends upon us as citizenry being more informed, being more aware, and not being afraid in terms of raising what are genuine relevant questions about what the government is doing and perhaps can do. A combination of these two will be a good first start in terms of getting the kind of health outcomes that we desire. But Madhura, quite frankly, the answer to your question is multiple papers, not just one. So I'll begin with this, but there's much more that remains unsaid and can't be said in an interview like this for reasons of, if nothing else, conciseness.
The last question, it's for both of you. You both recently co-authored a book chapter titled Trademarks and the Distortions of India's Many Healthcare Markets. What inspired you to write about this topic?
Ashish sir.
This is entirely yours, Murli. I just hung on to your coattails and ran with the show.
No, but you had the inspiration, sir.
No. On the contrary, please go ahead.
So, actually, it's a topic that is not new in some ways. I have written many years ago, 5-6 years ago, about the legal aspects of it, and it had a little bit of data, a little bit of analysis. And it so happened that somebody I knew in the US, a professor, was editing a book and asked me to write a book chapter on trademarks in the healthcare sector. That's great. I'll write about trademarks in the healthcare sector. Then it occurred to me that, well, that's still a very narrow field. So why not expand it and look at the economics of it? And Ashish and I had been doing some chatting and discussions generally for a year. So I offered it up to Ashish and said, Ashish, here's a thing that hasn't been written about before. So can we look at the economics of the healthcare market, and then trademarks plays a role in it. So that's how it started a year and a half ago. Yeah, about June or July last year.
Correct.
And we spent the last 1 year, I think, until about March, it was quite hectic. That we spent, it was most of my life for those 9 months. I mean, we had weekly calls twice a week, and I was researching every day. So it was like a job I had, which was getting that book chapter. I don't know what Ashish felt about it on the other side.
So this is potentially embarrassing for me, but I think it's important that this information be out there for students to benefit from this. Never say no to a research opportunity that is even remotely interesting to you. One, for its own sake, but second, because, and I'm very conscious that Murli is being interviewed with me, so I'm going to use the word spillover rather than externality. But the positive spillovers of having worked on this paper, including learning more about a subject that I'm supposed to know about, economics. You'd never believe it, but we found out how to think about markets better for having written this paper. And that's just one example. I can give you a dozen others. But writing this paper was, yes, a lot of intense hard work, as Murli pointed out, but it was also an immensely learning experience. So if you're a student who's listening to this interview or reading this interview, please do research for its own sake, because the learning that you get for having worked on a paper is immeasurable.
I think the important thing there was you think you know a concept.
Yeah.
You think you know how markets work. And then you're dealing with real life examples and shocking yourself by them.
Indeed.
So even basics like demand, supply, price, you take it for granted, right? And we had such a challenge finding a model for a group of substitutable drugs. It should be the easiest thing in the world, right? I mean, that's effectively the first 10 hours of economics is going to be spent on just this. This is the product, demand, supply, price, simple as that. And till the last day, we're still struggling with examples for a model that fits our statin example or gliptin's example. So Ashish makes a very good point. You think you know a subject, but you really get to explore it when you work on some of these things. We did the same thing with the vaccines article. When we predicted the failure of the private path to vaccines. And today you're seeing that, right? So the government announced liberalization of vaccines, allowed private players. Ashish and I wrote something the day after the PM gave his speech and said it won't work. It'll be a complete failure. Now, 6 months later, 5 months later, we know that it was a failure. It kind of distorted the market, ruined it. So I think Ashish's message is very clear. I mean, the inspiration for me was, it was great. I have no academic credentials. I'll get a book chapter out. Ashish sir will write it. I'll piggyback on it and everything's great. But for me, it was just curiosity. I don't know anything about economics, and here's a chance to get some experts in. And both Ashish and Saili were willing to engage in that, eagerly as students of economics. And so it was great fun. So it was everything I expected the book chapter to be, which is great fun.
Indeed.
So this brings us to the end of the main interview. Now we've got something fun, which I guess we all were looking forward to. We have got 5 random questions, and I'd like to start off with these. So for Murli sir, the first random question would be Arabica or Robusta coffee, and why?
I've had coffee for most of my adult life and as a daily thing, but I'm not an expert and definitely not a snob. So I go purely by taste. I know what I like and what I don't like. So I know I don't like Colombian coffee. And I do like, I think a particular taste, a little fruity, a little mellow, medium roast. I know what I like. But I'm willing to look at, coffees as they come. I don't have a fixed view that, okay, here single origin, shade grown, Arabica from this east-facing hill on the south side of the river, all that is a bit too much for me. I can do that about Scotch, of course. So I have a little more authority on all of this about Scotch. I visited all the distilleries in Scotland more than once. So I can do the gyan on Scotch, but not on coffee.
Anytime you want to go through a paper on single malts, Murli, I'm up for it.
I've offered it to you that, Ashish sir, I have some recommendations as well.
Indeed.
So the next question would be, if you ever, got a chance to write a blog post for Econ for Everybody, what would that post be about?
It would be about pitching or advocating that everyone should learn data analysis and why studying economics and statistics should be compulsory in schools.
Yeah, that's really nice.
I'm a self-taught in both economics and statistics, so I really struggle, with terms and with the way people speak economics and speak statistics. So I have to reduce everything to aloo pyaj tomato. My economics has to work in that market. So I find it really difficult when, Ashish and Saili and even students of theirs talk about economics in economic terms. I find it really tough. So for me, I think it should be taught in school, and it shouldn't be that it is self-taught aloo pyaj tomato economics.
Yeah, true. So we do take it for granted because we learn it every day.
I'm saying it should be taught.
Yeah.
Teaching, learning, two different things.
True. So the next question would be, why is your Twitter handle Grumpy Old Man?
It's an age thing. So first clue is there is a movie which you
Oh,
can watch from a long time ago. The second thing is that is not why I picked it. There is a BBC series called Grumpy Old Men, and I suggest everyone watch it. They did a first season and second and third and all that. And it's unscripted
oh,
and it deals with stereotypes. So they have picked 5 people in the age group 40 to 55. And some research obviously said that they are the grumpiest people in the world. So they asked them a series of questions. They are amazingly funny. They are honest. It's self-deprecating. So that was the basis. And then because that series did so well, they did Grumpy Old Women after that. So, so there's 2 versions of that, and there were 3 seasons of each. And they're fantastically funny, classic British humor from the 90s. So when I started, I didn't think Twitter would be anything serious. It was a lark. I just thought, "ठीक है, चलो, थोड़ा मस्ती होगा." You must also understand, it's a long time ago, right? So it's like more than 12 years ago or something. So at that time, Twitter was just meant to be some fun stuff. It was not meant to be anything serious. So I thought, how can I go out and just have a nice time, make some jokes and my sense of humor, and people won't get it, bad luck. There's no damage done. So that's how I picked Grumpy Old Man.
40 to 55, you said only.
Yeah, something like that, Ashish.
I turn 40 next year. I'll keep an eye out for if my behavior changes.
Yeah, I think some people were born grumpy.
so the next question is also about your Twitter account. So, can you please decipher your background image? So, I also asked Anushi, I asked Ashish sir. Some of us thought that it's abstract art. Some of us thought it's, I don't know. I mean,
My guess is Arjun has made it. Is my best guess. That's what I told Madhura.
No, Arjun is my son.
Right.
But it's all true.
There was some.
It's true. I like being on campus. I've never said no even to Ashish.
No. The
picture background.
Right.
I thought it was bio.
like,
That's the background is actually just a picture of me, right? At a conference.
no, that's your profile
There's
picture.
some artwork.
Oh yeah. Okay, so that one. So we had gone to Interlaken, and there was a exhibition of Picasso's pencil sketches, sponsored by a pencil company, Faber-Castell.
Nice.
And so they had it all over the exhibition rooms. And to inspire kids, they had left paper, lots of paper, and lots of pencils around for people to sit there and be inspired by what they're seeing and draw. So we spent the whole day there, and we came up with our version of what would be a Picasso painting. And his idea at that time was a cyborg, a human robot. And we're imagining how Picasso would have thought of it at that time when there was no robot.
Nice.
So it was half man, half machine. So even if you see the legs, it's got one leg and it's got a wheel. So it is funny in that Picasso sense. And this is what came out. So 2 things came out. This was one, there was another as well. So that's the background to the picture, which again goes with the grumpy old man thing, right? We are anti-technology, and we are seeing the world going towards half man, half robot, and we hate it. So I thought this would be and if you watch the series, you'll see that as well. that mobile phones and being unable to use technology is a very middle-aged man thing. So I thought that would be a good picture.
It's a nice story, Madhur. I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah.
And finally, the last question: what was your favorite band slash singer slash musician while growing up, and which of their songs would you recommend for the 21st century kids?
So it's a strange list, and let me paraphrase it by saying that most of the music of my generation was influenced by our parents, because they bought the music and they bought the tape, so we listened to whatever they listened. But I've tried to pick songs that were not influenced by my father, who bought all the tapes. So the obvious one is Sinatra, My Way. I think it's a good one for all kids to listen to and say, it doesn't matter how everyone else is going to live their lives, I'm going to live it my way. The second one is a songwriter, singer you've probably never heard of. He has only one hit in his entire life, so he's a classic one-hit wonder. And he's called Peter Sasse. And the song is Where Do You Go To My Lovely, which is about a rags to riches story of the person in that. The third one is a band called America, which people of my generation were very familiar with. And the song is Horse with No Name.
Oh, lovely.
And again, it follows this theme of this anonymous, nobody knows your name if you're in the desert, because there's no one to know your name. That's how the lines go. So again, it's about, okay, being anonymous. I mean, you don't have to be famous. You think of yourself as a horse with no name because you're in the desert. And in the desert, there's no one to know your name. The fourth is Edith Piaf. And I sent you a link to the song. It is No Regret, basically. And again, follows the same theme that get off and take the risks and do it, because in the end, you want to end up with no regrets, that you took all the risks and you made your life and it was fine. The next two are kind of strange. It's, again, from my time. It is Cohen, Tower of Song. And Leonard Cohen died a couple of years ago, and he's clearly one of those great poet, strong writers, and has a really sexy voice. So the song is really Tower of Song, and it goes with the same theme. All these great people can't do anything to me, and I'll come out of this looking great. Doesn't matter how old I am, I want to look great. So I think, and the last one is something I picked up in law school, which is my father's generation song. It's Johnny Cash. It's called San Quentin. And the song is very interesting because it was written in a prison. And Johnny Cash spent time in a prison.
Yeah.
And it's about how laws actually imprison people and how unfair they are and how oppressive they are. So it's a fantastic one. If you can see the video, please watch the video. He connects great with the prisoners and they just love him for it. And it's very powerful, exceptionally powerful piece on the law and how it dehumanizes people. So those are the 5 songs.
Wow.
And being a person of certain age, I think I'll add the 2 poems to it. So I've sent you the links. One is called Marie Wilson. It's about the IRA attacks and the death of a little girl. And the last one follows the theme of the songs, which is by Yeats, which is an Irish airman foresees his death, which is basically saying that, hey, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Nothing I'm going to do is change the world, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's great fun.
Remarkable selection.
Yeah, it's a great song. And it's always pinned in my office. It used to be pinned in the pin board right behind me to remind me every day that we're rather inconsequential people and all we can do is have a great time. It's quite liberating. It's one of the reasons I became a lawyer. We don't affect people's lives. Really, you're completely irrelevant. It's very liberating to be irrelevant.
So now the random questions for Ashish sir.
Mhm.
So what is your favorite genre of music?
I can never decide between two. Almost anything by Rafi and Kishore. Almost, because not all songs are great, but most of them are. And classic rock. And classic rock for me stops with Knopfler and Dire Straits. So late 1980s is about as far as I'm prepared to go. That's when the music stopped playing.
Correct. Correct. No power
So what is your
balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
So what is
sir.
your favorite memory from college?
Wow. There really isn't any one specific event, but a memory that I keep going back to is I didn't stay at the hostel in the Gokhale Institute, but I would quite often go there for a nap in the afternoons. And waking up and sitting outside the mess and drinking a quite contemplative cup of chai is, I don't know, a memory that just refuses to go away. So I often literally see myself in that spot, wishing I had the chai wasn't all that great, but I know the whole package is something I struggle to get out of my head.
So if you were limited to just one movie, which movie would it be?
Oh dear God. One movie. So I'll tell you the framework that I use to judge whether a movie is truly great or not. It should inform, it should educate, and it should make you think. But not every movie manages all three at the same time. So for example, Dulle Raja may be entertained, but certainly isn't informative or thought-provoking. But a movie that does fit all three, something along the lines of Forrest Gump, maybe not that movie exactly, but it's one movie that does fit, to my mind, each of the three.
It does.
I'll go with Forrest Gump for the moment. I'd also say I'm not particularly looking forward to Lal Singh Chadda. I don't think anybody's ever going to hold a candle to Tom Hanks, but we'll see.
So if you could be an expert in something instantly, like with the snap of your finger, what would it be?
Cooking. I would want to be an instant expert at cooking and I want to spend a lifetime savoring my own cooking. That would be a wonderful thing to do.
So in the last question, which is your favorite travel destination?
I have had the good fortune to go to Paris twice in the last 3 years, and I have had nowhere near my fill. My wife wants to go to London, and Murli is going to be slightly disappointed to hear this. I don't want to go to London unless, and here is the part that hopefully will not disappoint Murli too much, unless I can spend a month in London. Just the museums alone will take me probably more than a month. So I don't want to do Paris or London just for 3-4 days. And the Louvre alone will take a week. So Paris, but with time.
Yeah. True.
Is my current answer. And if I go to London, it's probably going to change one day.
So this,
I'm sorry, I need to rush back to
yeah.
class.
So
We're
this,
done, no?
Yeah, we are right.
yeah. We're done. Yeah.
Okay.
So this brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Madhura Jatin. See you, Murli. Bye.